Hi, I'm Brian.
I'm Derica, and today we're making beer! Before Brian gets in, because he really wants to get in, we want to say a special thanks to Dennis Harding for recommending this. We've had tons of people that wanted to say, guys,
I was gonna say,
make
tons of people
some
told me to make beer.
But Dennis is the one who added it to our list to remind us, so thanks, Dennis.
Now, I don't make a lot of beer, first off. That's part of why I haven't done it, and it's a big production. To make wine, you take juice, you take sugar, you take yeast, you pour it all together, you shake it up, you put it under the desk. Done. To make beer, yeah, a lot more steps involved. But what we're gonna make today is just my version, my own recipe of just a really simple brown ale style of beer. Notice what I just said. I said my own recipe of a brown ale style of beer. Look on the internet, you'll find about 5,000 different ways to make a brown ale. All of them are supposedly correct. So that makes mine correct too. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Anyway, for mine, I'm just using basic 2-row barley and some crystal malt. Now it's the 60L, so it's the darkest of the dark one. And I'm gonna use Cascade hops. That's basically all there is to it. Oh, I'm actually gonna use Safale S-04 yeast when we get to that point as well.
As you can see by our ginormous bags of grains, we were intending on doing a 5-gallon batch.
We were.
And we would totally be doing a 5-gallon batch if we were not attempting to film this for your benefit.
I always say you can never have enough time. Today is one of those days that we could never have enough time. It's just as easy to make 5 gallons as it is to make 1 gallon.
Yeah.
We're gonna do 1 gallon just because it's simpler for showing you everything, and moving pots around and stuff like that is a whole lot easier on film. To make this into 5 gallons, just multiply everything I say by 5. Literally everything.
Except for the yeast.
Actually, even the yeast. I thought about that because I'm gonna use 1 teaspoon of yeast,
oh, okay.
or like, 1/5 of a packet of yeast, so you'd use the whole packet to do 5 gallons. Easy. To get started, we have to do what's called a mash. Now, before we get to that, the first thing you need is malted crushed barley, okay? If it's in whole seed form, no good. If it's not malted, not going to work. What I mean by that is this stuff here. See if I can show you on camera a little bit better. See that? That is malted crushed barley. Now this is the 2-row. I came up with a 5-gallon recipe that I'm going to convert down to 1 gallon, but I'm actually going to do this a little bit differently, and I'm going to show you how you can just figure this all out on your own. It's really, really simple when you get down to it. It's math though, but I'm going to try to do it in my head just to make it even simpler for you. Okay, the thing to remember about barley, most malted barley, is it's about 35 gravity points per pound per gallon, right? Kind of like honey. It's 35 to 38 depending on your efficiency. We're not even going to get into any of that. I'm going to keep this really super simple for you guys. So if I want to make 1 gallon, I need, and I want like a 1070 or so starting gravity to end up with, a pretty decent beer. It'll be like 6%, give or take. If I do that, what I want to do is figure out how many pounds I need. So I need about 2 pounds of malted barley, right? Roughly 2 pounds. Now, I also know that for a brown ale, I want about 20% of those grains to be crystal malt and 80% to be the 2-row. So if I go by ounces, which it's easier to go by ounces, and my scale already blanked out on me. If I go by ounces, I like to zero it after. Okay, if I go by ounces, that means 2 pounds of malt going into my 1 gallon, right? So that means 32 ounces. So if I know I want roughly 20%, that means 6.4 ounces should be crystal malt, right? So let me start with the crystal malt, since Derica opened up the 2-row for me so nicely. Crystal malt. I love the way that smells. Anyway, so here's our crystal malt, and I'm gonna dump in 6.4 ounces. Okay, there's my 6.4 ounces of crystal malt. Derica's going to remove that for safety reasons. Now, something I want to bring up at this point is there's boil in a bag, there's all grain, there's all these different things. You can use extract if you want to do it with extract. I like using full grains, and I usually use small batches. I mean, a gallon's going to give me like 10 bottles of beer, so okay. I like changing things up. But this is probably my favorite style of beer, so, anyway. You can totally put this in one of those netting bags, boil it that way, and it makes cleanup a lot easier and all that kind of thing.
We were actually going to do that ourselves,
yeah,
but we couldn't locate our bags.
So, We're not doing it that way. And it's okay. We'll just wash it out after and rinse it and drain it, and it's fine. So we have our 6.4 ounces there. What I want to do now is fill the rest of this up to get to 32 ounces. Easy math, right? I didn't have to do a whole lot of strenuous exercise to get to those numbers. I'm going to do the grams for all you metric people. You probably already saw it in there. I think metric's actually better, but a lot of people have given us a lot of crap about not using metric. It's kind of like learning Gaelic and living in an American place. It doesn't really serve a lot of purpose, because if you speak Gaelic to American people, they're going to look at you like you got 3 heads. So if I start saying grams and kilograms and all that to people that I deal with on a daily basis, they're going to look at me like there's something wrong with me and not understand what I'm saying. So no matter how much you want to yell at us for doing it, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because where we live, they use the imperial system. Right or wrong, that's how it's done.
For example, I speak German. Brian does not.
It's really infuriating when she does it.
So yeah, we don't do that.
Doesn't do any good, because I don't understand what she said and make her repeat herself in English anyway. Okay, so now we have our grains, okay? And they're just gonna be in here. I'm gonna put them on the burner. I have not turned the burner on yet. What we're doing next is called the mash-in process. There's different names for it, but essentially what's gonna happen is this. The reason you use malted grains is because they've started to germinate a little bit, and there's now an enzyme in there, 2 enzymes actually, that help break down some of the starches into sugars. There's a whole science behind it. I'm not going to get into the whole thing. I don't want to make this a 45-hour video. It's probably going to be long enough as it is. Suffice to say that you need to heat this up to activate those enzymes, to release the starches and turn them into sugars that can then be fermented into beer, okay? The temperature you do this at actually has an effect. Anywhere between 150 and 165 is acceptable.
Degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah,
Degrees
Fahrenheit.
Celsius. Boop.
Most people will take about 153 as the happy medium. When you go below 153, you start to get higher alcohol from your brew, but it has less mouthfeel and body. As you go higher than 153 to 155, you start to get more mouthfeel. That's your stouts and you're really heavy. But they tend to have lower alcohol because you're not going to have as much fermentable sugars. Yeah, it's this whole balance thing. I'm looking for 155. That's my favorite number, because that way I get a little bit more mouthfeel out of it. I don't care about how much alcohol it's got in it. Beer should be an experience. It should taste good. That's the whole reason why I make it. If I didn't like it, I wouldn't make it, right? Anyway, so what I want to do is put in some water. Now, I'm making a gallon in the end, but I also know that I'm going to rinse these off or sparge these once I do this. So I probably only want to do about a half a gallon right now, maybe a little bit over that. Enough to get them wet and give them something to move around in, but not so much that we end up with too much later. First thing that you want to do before you even get the heat going is you want to break up any clumps. You do not want dry clumps in your grains. At this point, it's going to look a lot like oatmeal. And I'm just mixing that up real good to break up any clumps, make sure there's none in there. I will probably end up adding more water to this mash as we go, because it's going to soak up a lot. It's going to boil it away. Make sure you have a lid. We have our pot. I'm going to turn the heat on, and I'm going to put it to high, because this is the little burner that couldn't. It just takes forever to heat everything up. So what we want to do then is get a thermometer in here and just kind of set it there. You don't need to keep mixing it. Just once it's in, it's in. And I'm going to turn this guy on. Dereka hates my thermometer because she doesn't feel that the clamp works well. I love this thermometer. I think it's awesome. Yeah, we're at 71 degrees. It's going to take a little while for this to heat up. So we'll be back when this gets to about 150, 148 to 150. See you in a bit. It's been, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 minutes or so. And our thermometer is already reading like 154. So we're done. We're good. It's okay if you're off by a couple of degrees in the beginning, because it's going to adjust as it goes. I wanted to be at a target of like 148 to 150 so it would coast to that 155 mark. We're going to be there anyway. Now, you want to maintain that temperature for about an hour, as close as you can to that temperature. So what we're going to do, I see some of it's not quite there yet, but it's okay. It's at like 147, 149. You also want to keep stirring this while you're heating it up, because this is sticky. There's lots of sugars in there, lots of starch, and it'll burn on the bottom. If you burn it on the bottom, it's not going to taste real good in your beer. So what we're doing now, we're just getting it completely thoroughly mixed. It's coasting up to about 152 right now, so it should get to that 155 mark. Once we get a little bit closer, I'm just going to take all this stuff out. I'm going to hand these to my lovely assistant. We're going to need them again later. And she put the lid on it, right? Now what I'm going to do is take a towel, any towel, blanket, whatever you want to do. I'm just going to wrap it up. Now, I'm going to put this off to the side because we have other videos to make. Be back in about an hour. All right, so it's been about an hour, and I brought this back over. We removed the hot plate. It's been sitting on a blanket for a while. Let me get this out of the way so you can see. And I'm going to take the temperature and see how much we lost. Usually you lose a few degrees, and that's okay. Home brewing is not so much an exact science. It's just more of something you do for fun, you know? I mean, don't get crazy on it. This dropped down to a little lower than I really would have liked. It got down to like 140. But it also sat for a little bit longer than an hour. So at the hour mark, it was probably still in the 150 range. It's okay. We're just going to strain and sparge now. Now what that means is we're going to strain this off so we get all the grains out. And sparging means we're going to rinse the rest of the sugars off of those grains. We should end up with a little over a gallon of liquid, so that way when we do the next step, which is the boil, that concentrates down, we get a little bit more out of it. So, this is the part where I make a mess. Sometimes you have to do this in steps, because you'll fill up the grain, the strainer with grains. Smells like, apparently I could not find a smaller strainer, so, you know. That's the one we're going to use for now. Because all I'm going to do is this. What you do is kind of a back and forth thing here. So I'm going to take this one and set it in here while I use this one over here, and then swap them out and pull off all the grains, pull out all the liquid, because we want to save the liquid and not necessarily the grains. All right, so I have all the grains out. The next thing I want to do is put a little water in here. This was Derek's idea. Rinse it around so that way we don't lose any of the excess liquid that might be in here, rather than just rinsing it down the drain. Because the idea is all of your sugars, all of your fermentables, is what's draining out through these sieves, not the grains themselves. So essentially right there, that was a bit of a sparge, okay? That just means to rinse off some of the grains. Okay, so we have these things draining at this point, right? The next thing I want to do is pour some water over these grains, and basically I'm expanding on our mash, but I'm also rinsing off those grains, getting some sugar out of them, because there's all this sugar stuck to them right now, and they have overfilled this one just a little bit. I'm also being careful on my volume. I'm gonna boil this, and you boil it uncovered, so it's gonna, you know, concentrate down, it's gonna reduce. So we want to make sure that we have about 1.5, maybe a little over 1.5 gallons to start with, so that after 1 hour of boiling, we end up with about a gallon of wort. Wort for beer, must for wine. Don't ask me why. Somebody out there probably knows the answer. To me, they're interchangeable words. A word about the water we're using. It has been filtered for sediment and for chlorine, but it is essentially our tap water, okay? And I do that on purpose because it's got minerals and things in there already that are good for you and good for brewing. And honestly, once it's been filtered like this, our tap water tastes really good. I make coffee with it all the time and things like that. We also have an RO tap, and I don't use that as much for brewing because it lacks some of the minerals and nutrients that you might want. So it makes things taste a little flat sometimes. And again, I'm just pouring this over, sparging those grains. This is where if you had used a bag, you just pour it right through the bag. And then you just squeeze the bag out real good, and you know. Now, Derek is going to say something about these grains.
We're actually going to save our grains. We're not going to throw them away because I have a special experiment that I want to try based on a product that a friend of ours, Matt, purchased for Brian for 2 Christmases ago, I think. Mm-hmm. So these are edible. They're just grains. So keep an eye out for a new video where we're going to be using these grains again for something to eat.
So the next step is we want to get our yeast started. Now, I like to start yeast using some of the wort that I'm already using in my brew. That way I'm not diluting, I'm not adding more liquid, and I'm giving it a little bit of sugars to get started with. In case you were wondering, you know, I'll go a little bit more. In case you're wondering what yeast I'm using Safale S-04, which is an ale yeast. It's actually a yeast made for what I'm doing, believe it or not. And I'm looking at this packet going, okay, I made something with it once in the past. I'm probably just going to use the whole rest of this packet. That may or may not be a mistake, because beer, if it works, tends to go very actively in the beginning. But because it's been open and I don't remember when I used it last, I don't really want to take too much of a chance on having some of this be dead. So I'm going to try for the best colony I can get and use the rest of this packet, which was most of it apparently. And this is my self-stirring cup that I wish I could put a patent on. It's actually from the Magic Bullet. And all I do is I just stir that around. This is not a starter. This is just hydrating the yeast. All I'm doing is getting it mixed in with some of the wort so that it can start activating and coming to life. That's it. We set that to the side. That's going to sit there for quite a while because we have some other steps to do before the yeast gets added. I just like to get it going. Okay. So at this point we have our wort just all over the place. So what I'm going to do is take this bowl and pour it into that. All right, so again, like I did with that one, what I'm going to do is just start scooping this up and pouring it through these grains, but now I'm putting it into the pot that we're going to actually boil it in. All right, so what we did is we took those two strainers and we pressed them out and we poured everything through and just rinsed off as much as humanly possible and tried to get as much out. And here is our spent grains. Now that looks like a lot, and that's why we're not going to waste it. She's going to make something with it. I'm sure the chickens might get some of this. I might put it into bread. There's a lot of things you can do with this. This is a lot of grains. You want to dry this before you store it. So put it out on a cookie sheet, put it in a really low oven or your dehydrator, whatever you're going to do. Because if you store this wet, it's going to get moldy, it's going to go bad, it's going to spoil on you. Which brings me to the next step of making beer. We talked about things spoiling, right? Well, the next step is actually boiling that wort for about an hour. And during that time, we'll be adding in our hops. Now, something about hops that's really interesting. They bitter the beer, but what they also do is hops is a natural preservative. And that's how beer was stored for a little longer period of time, because it used to spoil on long trips. If you've ever heard of Indian Pale Ale, the reason why, or an IPA, as most people know it, the reason why it's so hoppy is because on the trip from England all the way around to India, beer was spoiling. So they added more hops to it, creating Indian Pale Ale. There's more to it than that, but that's the general gist. The hops acts as a preservative. Now in a brown ale, it's not so much a hoppy beer, okay? So I don't want to make it too hoppy. Generally, when you make beer, you use 3 different hop additions. One of them right at the beginning of the boil, which actually I'm going to turn this on and get this coming up because it's not at a boil yet. It's going to take a while. So we do 3 hop additions. There's one that they call the, well, there's different names for it, but one that you do right as it comes to a boil, at the first start of the 60 minutes of boiling. And that one, all it really does is it adds bitterness to the beer. That's all it's really for. Then you do one somewhere in the middle. Doesn't have to be the exact middle. People do it at different times. The one in the middle adds a little bit of flavor to it. So you get a little bit of that hops flavor. And then the one at the very end, usually like 5 minutes before you cut the heat, that one adds aroma. So they each do different things.
If you've seen our group video, then you will know that we talked about these 3 different additions with that, but because it's not a hopped beer, Groot, it does not have hops, we still did the 3 stages with herbs to have the bittering,
right,
the flavoring, and the aroma.
Okay, so while this is coming up to a boil, let's get our hops ready. Now I'm using Cascade hops, and what I'm going to do is use 0.3 ounces of hops because I'm making 1 gallon versus 5. And I just split this into 3 bowls, 0.1 ounce into each bowl. That's our 3 different additions. All right, that time has come. Our wort, it is boiling, which means it's at 212 degrees. This is going to go for a full hour. But first thing we're going to do, we're going to add our first addition of hops. Now, this one is for bittering. I'm just going to drop them right in. Give this a little bit of a stir, just so that nothing sticks to the bottom. Now I'm going to start a timer. I'm gonna set the timer for 30 minutes. The reason you boil it, okay, this is actually a really old tradition. You boil it because back in the day, beer was kind of used because there was some bad water, but that's not entirely accurate either. They had good water, okay? If people didn't have good water, they would have died, all right? So it's not completely because of bad water. It was a cheap way to get a lot of nutrients into workers, okay? So we won't get into the whole reason why beer exists, but let's just say that it wasn't always made with the best ingredients, all right? So they might have used some of that nasty water to make beer. So by boiling this for a full hour, we are killing it completely. Anything that can possibly be growing in there, we're killing it completely. So that's why you boil it. You really don't even need to boil it for an hour anymore. Like 15 minutes is probably enough. But to get the full bittering of the hops effects and things like that, that's what people still do. Some actually boil it much longer than that. So there you go. We'll be back in about 28 minutes and 2 seconds. All right, so we're coming up on the halfway point of the boil, or 30 minutes. There's about 22 seconds left. I'm just gonna stop the timer. And now it's been 30 minutes. So I'm gonna take our flavoring hops and put them in and just kind of sprinkle them around a little bit. Get my spoon, mix that up, set the timer for 25 minutes. In case you're wondering why 25 minutes, it's because the last addition goes in 5 minutes before the end. And we'll see you in 24 minutes and 56 seconds. Okay, so we're at the end of the boil, well, almost 5 minutes from the end of the boil, and we have our last 1/10 of an ounce, which would be 2.8 grams. You could probably do 3 grams. I don't think it would make much difference. Of hops. Now this is for aroma. This simply just makes the smell different in the final finished beer. But I want to say something about aroma. This smells kind of like an oatmeal grain kind of thing in the very beginning. And since we've been adding the hops, it actually smells like beer in the house, which is good and bad, depending on how much you like the smell of beer. But anyway, I'm going to add this now. Mix it. Oops, that didn't go in smoothly at all, did it? Let's just mix this through. Now we let this boil for 5 more minutes, okay? And that's it. Then we're going to cut the heat, but I'm probably not even going to go the full 5 minutes because I don't have a wort chiller and I'm not going to buy one. So we just basically fill the bathtub with cold water and set it in there. With small amounts like this, it doesn't take that long and it's okay. The main reason why you want to cool it down quickly is so that you don't get some sort of an infection. However, the chances are pretty minimal. You just boiled this. It's pretty clean. So unless you drop something in there, you're probably not going to have a problem. We haven't pitched yeast yet or anything. Also, the main reason you want to cool it down at this point is so that we can actually pitch yeast into it. So we want this to be under 100 degrees. So I'm just going to cut the heat right now. Okay, so I took it off the heat, and now I'm going to go set it in my bathtub in some water, just about this high. You're not going to see this part. And we'll be back once it's cooled down to yeast pitching temperature. This sat in my bathtub with about, that much water on it for maybe 15 minutes, and it's down to 98.8 degrees. I wanted it to be just under 100. We're there. Something of note that's really interesting to me is the color actually changed. It got nice and dark brown. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to strain it through this to get all the hops. The hops pellets, they tend to expand in the water, so we don't want that in our beer. So I'm just going to strain it through and into this pitcher, and then we're going to take a measurement of it. If anybody ever questions why you strain it before you do this, look in this. You don't want that in your beer. I mean, it'll settle out because you're fermenting and all that, but what I also want to point out is I measured earlier 1 gallon on this jug, right, because this is my fermenter, and how that equates to here. And it went to exactly the spot that I wanted it to. I mean, literally like 20 or 30 drops might have been too much. All right, so at this point, I want to take a reading, but should I add my yeast? Not yet. So my reading's going to be pretty close to approximate at this point. I'm just afraid I may have actually too much. So
pretty close to approximate.
Yeah. Shh. Now that you pointed out, they'll all know. Now, something that's kind of important to do at this phase also is to taste your must. If you don't like how it tastes here, you probably won't like the beer that it makes either. But I do want to get a reading. Efficiency plays a huge part in this. Now, brown ales traditionally are pretty low gravity, and this one is going to be no exception. It's going to start at 1034. I think I know why. It lost a lot of temperature during the mash process, so a lot of sugars didn't get converted over, and that's okay. It can still get to geez, it'll still probably be like 4 to 5% alcohol. I have no issues with that for a beer. It's perfectly fine. Beers are like that. And you know what? I'm just gonna pour a little bit of this off into here and give it a taste. It's hoppy. It's actually more hoppy than I expected, but it actually tastes pretty good. There's already, you can taste the grain sweetness in there. I think it's interesting. I think it's gonna be good. All right, so what I wanna do now is get this into here. First thing I wanna do though is we want all of our yeast in there, which has been foaming up like crazy for hours. So what I'm gonna do is pour that in. So I'm pitching the yeast first. You'll notice that. Then I'm gonna take some of this and rinse out the cup so that we get all of our yeast in there. Swirl it around, put that in. Okay, now, because I used a pitcher with a spout, this should be a lot easier. And I'm just gonna pour it right in. We don't worry about getting air into it at this point. Air is a good thing. You want some oxidization. So the more it foams up in there, kind of the better. We're just gonna fill it until we get to about the spot where there's not a lot of headroom, but enough that it won't explode. All right, I don't dare put any more than that in there. That looks pretty, I could do a little. Pretty much got the must down to nothing. There's a lot of goop in that still. All right, so what we have here is our final must. I was gonna take another reading just to make sure, but I don't really think that little bit changes anything. 1034 is our starting gravity. The most important thing you wanna do right now, see this? This is called an airlock. This is my B-team airlock. I actually like the S-shaped ones better, but I'm running low on airlocks right now. So I have a stopper or a bung, an airlock, I'll put that on there. Now I'm gonna put this in the area of fermentation and let this ferment out. If it doesn't start up in a couple of days, I'll take a look at that and I'll add some more yeast maybe, that kind of thing, stir it up a little bit. During the first couple of days, it's okay to give it a little shake if you want to. There's no real need to at this point. There's plenty of oxygen in there. Give this a week or two. When it's done, we'll show you the next step. If you like this video, give us a like and think about subscribing to our channel. That way you get to see everything that we do. Thanks guys, have a great day.
Bye-bye.